Hey everyone, Meteorologist Alexandra Cranford here, coming to you from still self-quarantine in my house as we head into almost day maybe 9 or 10 of this for me. And hopefully you're at home, maybe looking for a little something to do. And so we've been doing these weather lessons on our WWL TV Facebook Live, and I've been having such a good time doing this with you most days at 1 p.m. So I'm hoping the sound is good. I had an issue with that over the weekend, but I think everything has been fine since then. Thank you for joining me for this weather lesson, and today we're talking about a kind of quiet topic, but still a nice topic, and still it can be a very pretty and beautiful topic, also as with most weather, right, also can be a bit dangerous. And today the topic is fog. To me, fog has always been really interesting. It can make things so beautiful, sometimes especially like my mom used to say with Christmas lights, sometimes you can get the fog effect and it just looks so pretty, people's houses and other things like that in the winter. Fog, of course, can also be a big nuisance and a big annoyance if you're trying to travel over the causeway, say, or trying to get somewhere in the fog, and you're trying to drive. Of course, it can be a big thing to deal with. So we're talking about fog today, and what we're going to do is talk pretty briefly about these different types of fog. Is this right? Or is this right? You guys can see my little cheat sheet, huh? I write it normally and then I write it backward. I know there's a way to do this easier. But in any case, this is what we're going to talk about today. Mainly how fog forms in these different types: advection, radiation, freezing fog, and super fog. We'll talk a bit about the advisories, because if you watch our weathercasts on WWL TV, so often it does seem like we are issuing or having issued fog advisories. Those come from the National Weather Service. And so we're talking about fog a lot. We get tons of fog in South Louisiana, maybe not lasting all day usually, but we do get a lot. And then we'll talk a bit about fog safety, and then we'll set up something for tomorrow, because we're going to be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. with another weather lesson. I don't know if you guys are on this little schedule yet, but for me it's wake up, prepare these, have a bit of lunch, and then we do our Facebook Live. So I'm glad you guys are joining me at 1 p.m. on this Facebook Live. Oh, great. People are tuning in also and saying where they're coming from. I like to see that. If you guys get a chance, go ahead and post where you're watching from. I love to see it, whether it's anywhere, parts of New Orleans, parts of the North Shore, other areas in Louisiana, wherever. Just let me know. I like to go back and look. And I do see comments popping up, by the way, on my screen as I'm doing this. So, different types of fog. I guess I'll start off with yet another just beautiful visual of the different types of fog. This is radiation fog. And for students, especially who are joining me, and I've been seeing some people talk about these kind of bits of almost homeschool type lessons, this would be a beautiful shot of fog. This is radiation fog again, and what we see in South Louisiana especially is either advection or radiation fog. Those two types of fog are pretty common for where we are. So advection fog I'll talk about first, because sometimes that can set it up where it's really foggy. If you're on the North Shore, sometimes if you're right around the lake or the river in New Orleans, if you're along the coastline farther south or over in our coastal Mississippi spots, certainly these are times where we can see the thick fog, and sometimes that is advection fog as opposed to radiation fog. So advection fog is really when warm air comes in and we have a layer of warm air over a cool surface. So the ground is cool, or very commonly a body of water is cooler than the air that's moving over. So a lot of times this happens where we get a cold front. It really chills us down in the winter, say January, February, something like that. And it cools the ground down. It cools our water, lakes and rivers and creeks and things like that down. And then, as always happens in South Louisiana, things change and we start to get a warmer air mass moving in from the south. So that would bring in warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico. And as that warm air moves over the cooler ground, the air starts to cool down. So the air eventually cools down to what we call the dew point temperature. We love to talk about dew points in South Louisiana, don't we? I know you've heard all the other WWL TV meteorologists mentioning that lately, especially because our humidity has been going up and our dew point temperatures have been going up. So when the air cools to the dew point temperature, that is when we start to see condensation happen, and we see the changeover from water vapor into the droplets that would form a cloud. So that's the cloud forming on the surface, and if you joined me last week, we made a cloud making those water droplets on cloud condensation nuclei. So you may have been with me last week for that little experiment we did. And if you haven't seen the other weather lessons, you can go to my Facebook page, Alexandra Cranford, and just scroll down, and they're all shared right there, and they're also on WWL TV's Facebook page as well. If you scroll down, might have to scroll a lot though on that page. So in any case, here's what we have. We have the water that's cool, or land that's cool. We have warmer air on top. The air cools down to the dew point temperature and condensation happens. So that is the basic mechanism that we get fog in this case. So this would be advection fog. Advection, by the way, is that horizontal movement. So this can happen when this forms over water and then wind brings it over land. So you may notice that sometimes, especially if you're on the North Shore, say, and we have south winds, we can get some of this advection or sea fog. Sea fog is a type of advection fog forming over bodies of water like Lake Pontchartrain. And these southerly winds kind of push the fog over other parts of the North Shore, so into like Oak Harbor, Eden Isles, Madisonville, Lacombe. Some of these areas are starting to get the fog, and then if you were to go farther north, sometimes the fog begins to decrease the farther north you go. It kind of just depends on the different setups that we have, but that is something that happens fairly often. So this type of fog, and we're almost done with it, can form with winds, and it can form with cloud cover. Both of those are unlike the next kind of fog that we're going to talk about. For us, the advection fog can be quite thick, as you know, and it does happen especially in the winter and in the spring. The next type of fog, is this right? Is this the right side? Yeah, radiation fog. I think this is right. So this type of fog is a different kind of setup. This type of fog is it's still the same mechanism. We have air that's near the ground, it's cooling down very rapidly, and it cools to the dew point temperature, and it condenses, and it creates a layer of fog or a cloud on the ground. But it happens with some different things going on. It's not so much the warmer air mass moving in from the south. Instead, radiation fog happens a lot of times on just really cold, clear nights for us, and also calm nights where there's not a lot of wind. So these are all the things that would contribute to, first of all, what we call radiational cooling, which is when we get that really kind of still, cold, super clear sky sort of setup, and the temperature can drop really fast sometimes on those kind of cold winter nights. So that is radiational cooling, and that's because the Earth is kind of radiating the heat that it gained during the day away from the surface. So, and then the radiation fog would be when this kind of thing happens, and eventually the fog forms because the air is cooling down at the surface so rapidly. So a couple things about radiation fog. Again, cool, usually calm winds and clear skies for the most part. Wind would actually disrupt the formation of this type of fog. And also something about radiation fog is it forms in layers going up. So for example, it would be cooler right at the surface, so that's where you would start to see radiation fog. Then the air in the layer above that starts to cool down, and so it starts to build up to the north. And then the layer above that, or not north, just up in the atmosphere, and then the layer above that cools down. So it kind of builds up, especially through like a cold overnight sort of period, where we have a cold night and the temperature continues to fall and decrease. Also with radiation fog, and actually with advection fog too, it can be patchy. Have you seen our weathercast where we say that? Patchy dense fog, patchy fog possible. We often in South Louisiana do have patchy fog, and that's because of a couple of different things. The advection fog, as I mentioned, might happen over a body of water and not so much in maybe a different spot. Radiation fog would happen sometimes in particular spots like low-lying areas. I've seen this before driving home on cold nights, kind of looking off maybe into the distance, maybe a little meadow or an area of open grass, and you can see the fog beginning to form. That would be sometimes radiation fog, depending on what's going on with our atmosphere at that point. But I have seen that happen. It starts to form in a low-lying area, and then it can build up from there. So in that case, it would be patchy too. And in some sort of circumstances, it can be very patchy. When you're on the interstate, I don't know if you've seen this before, but this can be a very dangerous type of fog to form. Even though it's not continuous thick fog, as you may know, you may enter a patch where it's a little lower lying, some fog has settled in, and then you may emerge and it looks fine and you speed up again, and then you enter another very clearly defined sort of area of patchy fog. So that is one of the big safety things that we think about in South Louisiana and in the New Orleans area, is the patchiness of some of the fog. Also, just to let you guys know, of course, our fog in Louisiana, in South Louisiana, often goes away after we get into the daytime hours. And that's because usually our temperature goes upward, it really increases during the day, we get sun coming out, or we are able to heat up. But in other parts of the nation where it is a little bit more difficult for temperatures to take off, especially maybe in valleys or other areas where the sun isn't just coming out and heating you up super fast like we have in South Louisiana, in those spots, fog can be a bit more continuous. And every now and then in South Louisiana, we'll have a foggy day where it's foggy in the middle of the day as well as in the morning. But typically for us, as you know, this kind of setup for fog for us happens at night and into the early morning. And of course, that's so hard on commuters, people going home late at night, and especially people waking up early and trying to get on the roads right around sunrise. I know if you're on the North Shore and you commute, or if you're coming in from different parts of the city, that's so often the topic that we're talking about with weather or traffic, etc. There's another type of fog, and I don't really have to talk about this one too much for those of us in Louisiana, because it's freezing fog, and we have, as long as I've been a meteorologist, I don't really remember us ever having a freezing fog advisory. This is super cool droplets of water that would come into contact with a surface when the temperature is at or below freezing, and it would freeze on the spot. So this can happen, again, not so much for New Orleans people, but it can happen, and it's a different type of fog. It can be somewhat dangerous, and it can create low visibility when it forms on cars and things like that. There is another kind of fog called super fog, which would happen when you have fog mixed with smoke. And so there might be some burning like organic material that's still damp and still smoldering, and some of that smoke sometimes mixes with cooler, moist air at the surface, and that can create a very thick kind of fog. So that would be called super fog. Visibility with that can be about 10 feet or less, so that would be difficult to drive through for sure. Okay, talking quickly about the different advisories that we have to go with fog, because I just wanted to fill you in if you have watched our weathercasts and are just kind of interested in what the actual criteria is for dense fog advisories. Dense fog advisories, we talk about that a lot, and that would be when our wonderful National Weather Service meteorologists decide that conditions are looking like we're either having fog or will have fog soon, and they'll issue an advisory. And we're usually there saying, oh yeah, it does look like a setup for a foggy night or a foggy morning tomorrow. So in that case, what that means is visibility would be a quarter mile or less. That's when it gets pretty hard to drive on the roads where you want to take some precautions. By the way, we also, there are such things as freezing fog advisories. We, again, I don't think, in my experience, have seen one in Louisiana in my years of doing this, but that would be a mile or less visibility. And then there's also a marine dense fog advisory. So all of you who go out on boats or are out on the water, like to fish or boat and things like that, there are often marine dense fog advisories, and for those, visibility is usually, the criteria would be a mile or less visibility. And that's because, you know, slowing down and stopping and turning a boat is a little bit more cumbersome than, you know, a car. So that's why the visibility is a mile or less for marine dense fog advisories, and it's a quarter mile or less for driving. As we look at a couple of different safety things really quickly, for driving in fog, of course the biggest thing is slow down, leave lots of space ahead of you. I think something that I have seen a lot is that a lot of people seem to want to put on bright lights, which makes sense, it's really hard to see, but the bright lights with your headlights actually causes a bit of a glare because it kind of reflects off of the water droplets, and it actually makes it harder for the driver to see, as well as, you know, probably making it more difficult for other drivers too. So actually the thing with driving with fog is just to have your regular low beam headlights on and not the high brights. If you're boating in fog, slow down, use running lights. You can be especially aware of sounds, of course. You guys who are boaters already know this, probably don't have to tell you this, but be aware of, fog horns or, the clinking of masts and things like that. Of course, have a GPS, have your phone on you, and have a compass and a weather radio. And flying in fog, many of us have had delays having to do with that before. So for that can be dangerous, especially when there are what we call low ceiling clouds, where the base is very low, can make it dangerous for fog. And for that, sometimes, you may know, of course, we sometimes have to delay flights or flights get delayed. And for those, if you are a pilot, of course, follow guidelines from the NOAA Aviation Weather Center and from the FAA. So, fog. We talked about the different kinds, including especially advection fog and radiation fog, the two kinds that we especially see in South Louisiana. We talked about freezing fog, not such a concern for New Orleans folks, because it hasn't even gotten to the freezing point in New Orleans in more than 2 years. So don't have to worry about freezing fog often, of course. And then super fog, which would be the fog that's mixed with smoke and can be especially difficult to see in. Okay, thank you guys for joining me about fog. I am, of course, in self-quarantine. If you have missed my explanations at the beginning of these in the past, I was traveling a week and a half ago and have had to do a self-quarantine after that, after coming back. So I will soon, I think, be back on air and be doing my weathercasts from home with you guys. But in the meantime, we're doing these fun weather lesson videos. So I will do another one tomorrow at 1 p.m. This will be a regular thing this week through at least Thursday. And we will be talking about another weather topic. But as you guys know, I'm in self-quarantine. So tomorrow I'm gonna try to do another experiment. I'm gonna have to gather some supplies, and I hope I can do this in self-quarantine. I'm gonna try to make it work. But for this one, you guys don't need anything special. Last week we did an experiment where you needed a water bottle and a match. This time I think I would just show it to you guys. So just wanted to give you a little preview of that. I think that's gonna happen tomorrow at 1 p.m. We're certainly going to have one of these tomorrow at 1 p.m. and I'm gonna try to get my materials together. I'm gonna figure out a way to do it. So, thank you guys for joining me. I'll see you tomorrow at 1 p.m. I'll see you the next day at 1 p.m. here on Facebook Live. Hope everybody's taking care. I love to see your different comments and I love to see where you're watching from. So please keep posting those when I do these things. And I hope to see you then. I'll see you tomorrow at 1 p.m. Take care, guys. Have a good rest of the afternoon. See you soon.